Welcome everyone to tonight's event focused on how Massachusetts can become a leader in reducing embodied carbon, especially in buildings. This is such an exciting event for us, and we are so grateful to have you and to have our fantastic speakers joining in to discuss this critical effort and how we can effectively move forward. So before we get going with the speaking portion of the event, I just have a few housekeeping items. You may not be able to, but in case you are, please do keep yourself muted during the event so that the speakers can kind of continue to move through their comments and their presentation. If you haven't done so already, please share your name and the town that you're calling in from in the chat. As I mentioned, we'll be recording this, so keep your screen off if you don't want to be on the recording. My name is Logan Malik, and I'm the Interim Executive Director here at the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And MCAN is a climate advocacy nonprofit. We were founded in 2000, and we are primarily focused on supporting communities in taking action locally and at the state and regional level to build a fossil fuel-free, just and equitable future for all. And that has to include this critical issue of embodied carbon, the carbon that we call, as you know, in the walls. For us, it's all about local action. Local action is the pillar of effective climate advocacy and climate action. And what we see is that local idea and the advocacy works its way up to the state, the regional, and then the federal level, and that is how we make change. And that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about how we can make change and some incredible opportunities to take action here in the Commonwealth, specifically on embodied carbon. So tonight's agenda we will start by hearing from some fantastic leaders who are working in the state Senate and in the House on the critical issue of embodied carbon. And so we're so excited to hear from you all. We're then going to just do a quick overview to make sure everyone is up to speed on what embodied carbon is and why we see it as being so important. And then the rest of the event will really focus on action. We're so excited to hear from Thomas O'Neill who works at the City of Cambridge about some of the really great work that is taking place there. And we're going to talk also about the legislation that our fantastic champions are sponsoring and why we think it's so important that we prioritize this session. And we're going to conclude by providing folks with an opportunity to get involved and to take action in this critical work. So as you can tell, there's a lot of exciting stuff in store this evening. So I am going to get us started. And I'm going to get us started by introducing our first legislative champion, Senator Cream. Senator, we are so grateful to have you here and to have you focusing on this issue. So welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Logan. It's so great to be here, and it's so great to be amongst all of the great advocates that are on this call and those that couldn't make it, because without everybody stepping up to the plate, we're not going to get where we need to be. So I know there's a lot of work necessary to advance embodied carbon legislation in Massachusetts. And thank to the other legislators here tonight who also championed the issues. Sean Garbely, Representative Garbely, sends his best and regrets. He's certainly been a champion, but he had another commitment, and he is not on the call today, but very, very interested. I got involved in embodied carbon last session because even though building materials are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, it didn't seem like Massachusetts had much of a plan to reduce their carbon intensity. Embodied carbon accounts for 11% of emissions globally. Yet state government efforts to reduce emission from building material have been extremely limited. Under the Leading by Example executive order, DOER was tasked with evaluating embodied carbon strategies for state construction projects. But so far, no policies have been put in place. And I don't really think that has to do with this administration. So I clearly want to make sure that I know this administration will take a different view. Mass DOT has also been exploring embodied carbon strategies, but again, no policies have been put in place. We can't afford to wait any longer. I filed 2 bills that would require Massachusetts to begin reducing embodied carbon in state construction projects. One bill focuses just on concrete, a material where low carbon alternatives are available and affordable. The other bill is a bit more ambitious in its scope. Borrowing from the approaches of Colorado and Oregon, it requires state agencies to set maximum global warming potential for materials, including asphalt, cement, concrete, glass, steel, and insulation. Those maximums would ratchet down over time, leading to continuous reductions in embodied carbon emissions. By procuring low carbon building materials, the Commonwealth can create demand for climate-friendly products, push industry forward, and spur additional embodied carbon innovations. We've been a leader in so many other areas of climate policy, and we can be a leader here. I'm hopeful with the support and advocacy of everyone on this call and this group in particular, we will finally take action on embedded carbon this session. We cannot get to the levels that we want to get for no zero emissions unless we really look at things like carbon. And for so long, we haven't. So I'm really glad to be a part of a group that calls for action, not talk only. So you can talk, but you got to walk the walk. And this group cares about action. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to hearing from other colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator, for your leadership on this issue and you know, for really providing us with an avenue to take with you. We are so grateful. And likewise, really excited and grateful to have another senator on this call, Senator Comerford, who also has filed legislation, and that is what it's all about, is bringing multiple efforts and multiple solutions. So Senator Comerford, we are so grateful to have you. Take it away.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really great to be with everyone tonight. And thank you to the Massachusetts Climate Action Network, or MCAN. Miranda and Logan, thank you for hosting this really important discussion on how we as a Commonwealth can be in the lead, can lead the nation in reducing embodied carbon in buildings. You know, I just want to start by saying thank you to Senator Cream for her leadership in this area. And also, many know the Senator is the chair of the Senate's Global Warming Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change Committee. And, you know, just already the thought leadership you've brought, Senator, in the Senate has been so critical. I want to also say that I'm really grateful to have the bill I have, which MCAN, of course, helped lead the development of with Representatives Sicolo and Owens. I'm grateful for their partnership on this bill. And of course, Representatives Garbely and Cahill, because they're, you know, we're in this big group of people who are joining with the folks on this call and MCAN to really call forward the issue of embodied carbon. And I've been really pleased in my relatively short time in the legislature to watch how the legislature, the House and the Senate, tackle building emissions. Not so long ago, MCAN proposed a bill to pass a net zero stretch energy code that I had the real privilege of working on. And I'm going to talk about that at the end, because back then that was a new idea. Like this is an emergent or burgeoning idea. And now we have to move with the right kind of urgency to tackle embodied carbon and greenhouse gas emissions associated with all activities related to building and building materials. So the bill that I've filed with the great representatives is S2090. It's an act incorporating embodied carbon into state climate policy. And this creates, it's actually quite a pragmatic bill. It creates a statewide body to develop best practices in measuring and tracking carbon, to help boost carbon counting literacy for everyone engaged in the building sector, and change building codes with the goal of reducing carbon embodiment, the carbon embodied in buildings, and carbon emissions. So of course, again, MCAN, thank you. I also want to tip my hat to AIA Massachusetts, because these are, a group of pretty committed architects who also want to be part of a climate change revolution, if you will. And they really threw down on this bill and really taught us what was possible and how far we could push what was happening currently in the Commonwealth. And then we all pushed it a little farther through this bill. So a great partnership with a pretty big tent, including the folks on this call. So let me just close by going back to that net zero building. And because when we were corresponding with Miranda and Logan, we talked about people power. So when we brought the bill for the net zero building construction code, and Senator Cream, I'm sure will remember this, people in the State House were like, what? Net zero? Now, places in the Commonwealth were doing net zero building before this bill, but it was a newer concept in legislation. But it didn't remain new very long because of the advocacy of people. So the people like you all on the call helped us in the legislature understand, one, that it was being done and that we could do it statewide. Two, that you wanted it to be done, creating the social and political conditions necessary for us to rise to the occasion and take risks. And three, that you were going to hold us accountable for getting it right, for being part of this net zero Commonwealth by 2050 and having net zero building construction be one of those building blocks. So remember the power that you hold to not only call folks like us to a call like this, but also help the legislature understand new ideas as good ideas and help us pass those good ideas, through your good advocacy. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Logan, with my thanks. And of course, Miranda, thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for your partnership on this effort and the specialized stretch code and on so many other efforts to transform our economy to a fossil-free and just clean energy future. We are so grateful to be working with both you and Senator Cream on this important issue. And likewise, we are so excited to be partnering with representatives in the House. As folks may know, this is a busy time for legislators in the House as they are, in the process of negotiating the budget. So going in and out, and it is 24/7. So a few folks were unable to make it. Representative Garbely, as Senator Cream mentioned, was got tied up, I believe, in this legislative work, but he has been a fantastic supporter of this work and is excited to continue the discussion. Similarly, Rep. Cahill had to jump into a committee meeting to testify on a few amendments, so he was unable to join as well. But likewise, really sends his regrets that he couldn't make it, but also excitement to continue to work on this issue and to really champion it moving forward. We do have a few representatives who are able to join, and we are so incredibly grateful for you all being willing and being able to step out of the busy schedule to join us. We're also just so grateful for your partnership on this issue and so many others that we have had the privilege of working with you on. So I want to first start by introducing Representative Sokolow by saying thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you for being here, and we are so excited to be partnering with you.
Thank you, Logan. I'm thrilled to be here as well. I didn't think I was going to be able to make it. As you mentioned, we all are just this moment engaging in testifying on our amendments that are related to the environment. And Chairman Cahill has to be on the panel hearing all of us speak to our specific amendments. So a lot of energy, and very exciting time and a very hopeful time. So I'm just going to briefly speak to H764, which I co-filed with Representative Steve Owens, who I think is also on the call and may be able to say a few words after me. It is the companion bill to S2090. Which Senator Comerford just so elegantly outlined in terms of what the bill would do. I'm very excited about this particular bill and very grateful to MCAN for really helping put this legislation forward. It is a critical effort to help us measure, help us educate, and help us transform our building sector to low embodied carbon materials. And to put this in perspective about why it matters, in my district alone, we have 70 to 100 teardowns a year. So the pace of our building is pretty significant. We also are building a lot of biotech large buildings, and we need to know that we are building them in the way that is going to produce or utilize the least amount of carbon. And we don't know as it stands today, without doing the data collection, without doing the research and tracking the numbers. We really don't know and can't educate both our architects and our construction companies what the best practices are. So this bill will really help us advance best practices and just go a long way to reducing embodied carbon. And I also chair the Zero Waste Caucus, and one of the very significant components of our waste stream is construction debris. And if we are able to do a better job reusing and recycling building materials, that will not only lower our embodied carbon consumption, but it will also go a long way to reducing what we are incinerating or landfilling. So it's a really, my interest is twofold in helping advance this legislation. So again, I'm thrilled to be here. Chairman Cahill sends his regrets and is looking forward very much to the hearings on these bills. He's excited to have all of you come forward. And I want to echo what some of my colleagues have said about how important it is that the advocates continue to engage in this very significant work, testifying, coming forward, pushing all of us to advance this legislation so that we can get where we need to be for our environment. So thank you again to MCAN and to all of you who are here this evening.
Thank you so much, Representative Sokolow. And you bring in such an important piece, which is waste and the fact that, this really is a whole process that we need to be thinking about, and an opportunity to continue to do more in really decarbonizing every single aspect of our economy and of our built environment. So thank you for your leadership and for your partnership. And thank you also to Representative Owens for partnering in this work and for being a champion on buildings and other climate issues. We are so grateful to have you here, and so happy that both you and Representative Sokolow were able to get away for a moment. So go ahead and take it away, and thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks so much. Happy to be here with MCAN. Thanks so much to MCAN. Thank you to my co-sponsors in the Senate, as well as not just the lead sponsor of this bill, but my my seatmate who sits next to me in the chamber, Rep. Sicolo. The easy thing about going last is I can always just say what everybody else before me said, because they've all given really wonderful reasons for why this legislation is so important, particularly in places like I represent, similar to Rep. Sicolo. There's a lot of development going on in Watertown and in North and West Cambridge, particularly. There's buildings being torn down, there's buildings being put up. And what we do want to make sure is when they are being built, we are doing them with the best practices going forward into a carbon free or carbon neutral built environment. And I think there's really an opportunity for education here, not just in this bill, but in your activism towards it, because I think we have sort of an idea on how to decarbonize transportation, right? We have sort of an idea that we move people from gas-powered cars to electric cars or to transit, that will help us, decarbonize transportation. We have sort of an idea on how to decarbonize our electric power generation, right? We move away from oil-fired power plants. We move away from gas-fired power plants to wind and solar and energy storage for when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. We have sort of an idea on how to move away from heating buildings, right? We know, okay, well, we have heat pumps, we have electric heat. We want to move away from gas furnaces and oil furnaces. That a little bit trickier, but where I don't think there's a lot of public conversation right now is on what about the built environment? What about the buildings that we are living in, using, working in? What sort of carbon is embodied in those buildings, and what happens when those buildings reach the end of their lifespan? And is the carbon that's trapped in them going to be put out into the environment? What happens when we build new buildings? Are we just creating these time bombs? These are questions that I don't think a lot of people even know to ask, let alone know the answers to. So I'm really excited for the conversation around this bill and to the education around the bill, because I think this is kind of the cutting edge of where we have to go forward in our quest to have a carbon-free environment and in our energy sectors. So thank you to MCAN, and I really appreciate all the work that you are doing on this. And I apologize for being a little bit late and a little bit heading out a little bit early as well.
Not a problem. And thank you, Representative. I think it's so right that it's our job to really bring this to the fore because this is the cutting edge and it is so critical. And so important that we do continue to raise and to highlight the need to incorporate this into a broader strategy to combat the climate crisis. So I want to just thank our legislative champions so much for being on the call today and for your tireless advocacy in support of reducing embodied carbon, but also just working to build a just and a clean energy future. We are so grateful to have you all representing us and partnering with us as we move forward. So, and thank you for being here. It is so incredibly fantastic to get the pleasure of working with you all. I want to turn our discussion because the senators and the representatives have highlighted these critical pieces and why this legislation is important. And I want to make sure that we're bringing everyone along. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is embodied carbon. How do we define it? We're going to then focus on what is happening and how you can be a part of it. So we're going to look at what's happening locally and then what's happening and what all of these exciting bills are. But before we do, I am going to turn it over to MCAN's fantastic building campaign director, Miranda DiOlio, to give us a little intro into what embodied carbon is. So take it away, Miranda. And I am realizing that Miranda may have dropped off the call. So that is okay. I am happy to cover this, albeit perhaps not as elegantly as her. But when we talk about embodied carbon, we're really referring to the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the manufacturing, the transportation, the installation, maintenance, and disposal of building materials. So it's really a whole, life cycle that we are looking at. And this is a massive percent of global annual greenhouse gas emissions, 11% at some estimates. That some of those estimates go all the way up to 25%. So really quite astonishing when you look at the impact. And the fact that we are not necessarily working on it in the way that we should be. So, we know that in order for us to transform our buildings from climate polluters to protectors of our health, of our communities, and of our climate, we have to include embodied carbon in the discussion as well as operational carbon. Just so important that we think about the whole life cycle of a building. And as we decarbonize, as we have made, to Senator Comerford's point, we have made incredible progress in reducing operational carbon and really focusing on policies that will help us to move forward in that way. As we continue to do that, the embodied carbon becomes all the more significant, and its share of emissions in our built environment becomes larger and larger. So without embodied carbon as a centerpiece of building decarbonization, we will not be looking at the full picture. This just gives you another sense of what we're looking at, and the fact that building operations makes up a large percentage, but add into that the building construction industry and other industries associated with buildings, and with these materials, and you really see that building decarbonization has to be central. And I will also just add here that there are some materials that are more intensive than others. Concrete was mentioned as a critical piece. And there are solutions that we know are available to reduce the impact of embodied carbon. It's also important to keep in mind that when we talk about policies that will address this, the benefits of reducing embodied carbon go beyond just climate, which we know we're facing a climate crisis, but it goes beyond that. If we're able to reduce embodied carbon, we can realize improved air quality through emissions reduction and improved health outcomes at construction sites and at manufacturing facilities. Equity, oftentimes it is our frontline and communities that are by these manufacturing plants and that are working to living and going to school near places where there is a lot of construction and there is a lot of this activity. We can reduce the negative impact on those communities through acting on embodied carbon. And Senator Cream mentioned this, but the economic opportunities that we have here in the Northeast, in Massachusetts, if we move forward now on reducing embodied carbon, is significant. From an economic standpoint, we can really build on and be a leader in a burgeoning industry focused on low embodied carbon materials. So it's a win-win-win as far as working on this issue of reducing embodied carbon and measuring it. There are some key definitions for folks to keep in mind as we move forward and as you think about steps that can be taken to reduce embodied carbon locally. So the first definition is a life cycle analysis. And we know that in order to reduce embodied carbon, we've got to measure embodied carbon. And that is what these tools are so critical for. So a life cycle analysis helps us to assess and understand what the upfront carbon impact is, what the maintenance impact is, and what the demolition impact of a building is. In order to do a life cycle analysis and in order to move forward on that, we need environmental product declarations. These are essentially tags identifying the environmental impact of various different products. And as we get more of these, we'll be able to understand what the impact is, and we'll be able to make better choices in the market and in various different construction and industry sectors as we move forward. And again, global warming potentials, a critical way for us to be monitoring the work that we're doing and reducing the impact. So I hope that was a helpful primer. That is kind of a little bit of an overview of the basics. But I want to pass it over to talk about what can be done. And to do that, I am going to pass it over to Thomas O'Neill of the City of Cambridge. Cambridge has been doing wonderful work as it relates to embodied carbon. So we are so excited to have you, and we're so excited to hear a little bit more about the progress that you're making and how you plan on moving forward. So take it away.
All right, yeah. Hi, thank you, Logan. Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Tom O'Neill. I'm a sustainability planner with the City of Cambridge in our community development department. And in case anybody is wondering, there's no relationship to Tip O'Neill, but we do share a name. So if we can, so I'm going to talk today kind of about the current status of my work related to embodied carbon in the city. And then I'm going to hit on how we got to this point, and then kind of cover why we chose and the reasons for our work in this space. So our work in this area really started this past February, where City Council in Cambridge voted to adopt an amendment to our zoning ordinance. So Article 22 in our zoning ordinance is where we lay out all of our green building guidelines. And this amendment builds on those to include embodied emissions accounting. And since this has just recently been adopted, it is not in effect yet. So we are now working on how to best implement this policy and promulgate regulations. So we're working with some really fantastic consultants to do a number of things with us, such as taking a deep look into the various green building certification programs that are out there. What level of consideration do they give to embodied carbon? How are they measuring embodied carbon? How are they giving points towards their certifications? And with that, we're also looking into what existing tools there are currently out there to estimate and calculate embodied carbon, conduct whole building life cycle analyses, and these tools being ones such as EC3, Tally, the Athena Impact Estimator is another one, and there are a lot more out there. There are more than I originally realized. So it's interesting to see how that industry is really starting to develop. And through this process, we're also conducting some stakeholder engagement, doing a couple of workshops, discussions with industry professionals from developers, architects, engineers, some business groups, ranging from local folks who are currently developing in Cambridge to national firms who are used to doing this kind of reporting, folks who are really starting to get started on doing this, to get a sense of how it'll be best for us to incorporate this new emissions counting into our green building review process, but then also how it would impact their operations. And this project will also result in a reporting template for these embodied emissions, which will be rolled into our green building narrative, which is already part of our green building review process, which applies to projects who require a special review. So projects of a certain size already have to go through this process. And so we're kind of folding this emissions accounting into that. And so, yeah, this project will provide us with a reporting template, which we can provide to them to give their data to us, but then also an educational toolkit for understanding embodied carbon and the process for reporting to the city. So now we kind of got here in two different ways, which I will speak to. So yeah, we had two initiatives that really kind of happened in parallel. And to start, I kind of need to take a step back to 2015, which is when the city first adopted our Net Zero Action Plan, which lays out a series of actions and activities that serve as our guiding principles to achieve net zero by 2050. And this plan is reviewed every 5 years. And so this past winter, the first 5-year update was officially adopted. And in this 5-year updated plan, addressing embodied carbon in new construction, particularly through our green building requirements, was highlighted as one of our key actions. And so to achieve the goals that we have for this action, there are several short-term, medium, and long-term activities which have been laid out. And so our first series of steps in this plan is to adopt new regulations through our zoning ordinance, which we have just done this past winter. And then to start collecting and start collecting data and establish a baseline. Because once we have a solid baseline for projects that are happening in Cambridge, we can then work towards setting carbon intensity targets and possibly carbon intensity targets for projects, maybe materials later down the line, and then establish reduction goals that can also scale up. And so while we don't know exactly what those reduction targets could be yet, we could envision them being, an initial 20% reduction of embodied carbon for an entire project, and then some years later, increasing that to something like 50%. And so one thing that we're trying to think about as we move through this process is really how prescriptive do we need to be in our approach as the field of embodied carbon emissions accounting continues to mature. And so that's how we got started through our Net Zero Action Plan. But what really kicked off our work was there was a zoning petition filed by one of our city councilors as part of a Green New Deal for Cambridge. And in this zoning petition, it was reworked a couple of times, but it was in this language that is going to require this emissions accounting through Article 22, our green building requirements. And so this language is up online. It'll take effect sometime next year. And this zoning language will apply for projects over 50,000 square feet, which require a special permit already. And it will also exclude those with residential units. So from this zoning petition, which was adopted, we are now working on figuring out how to implement this new emissions accounting element to our zoning code. It should also be noted that part of our plan is to consider building reuse and adaptive reuse policies for existing buildings, because if we can extend the useful life of an existing building, then that will negate any emissions from tearing down that building and then constructing a new one on top of it. Though there are a lot of considerations around that, and it's a little out of the scope for the project I'm working on directly, but it is something that we are thinking about. So now, why did we want to think about embodied carbon? So we wanted to focus on embodied carbon because we wanted to develop a deeper understanding of what it means to be net zero and really understand the full climate impact of development that's happening in our city. So during the 5-year review process for our Net Zero Action Plan, a committee, a task force was assembled to review the existing plan, the progress we had made on those activities to date, and then provide some direction for moving a plan forward. And over a series of meetings and in lengthy discussions, embodied carbon was brought up by several different task members at different points of the conversation, which really highlighted the need to incorporate embodied carbon into our kind of long-term plan. And so that's how the conversation really got started. There are a lot of smart, insightful, and climate-aware task force members who pushed us to consider all different aspects of the built environment beyond just operational energy. And so that will really help us, develop a deeper meaning for what it means to be net zero. And so when a new building is constructed in Cambridge today, it already needs to meet LEED Gold criteria. They don't have to pursue the certification, but they at least need to meet the criteria. And so the buildings that are going up in Cambridge today, especially the large ones, which go through our special permitting process, are already really energy efficient. And so it's that upfront, that embedded cost of carbon that makes up a bulk of the lifetime carbon. Because as buildings, get more efficient over time, that upfront cost is really going to have the largest impact. And so that's how we really started to think about this. And the industry is really starting to pick up speed in this space as well. Even though there's still a lot left to be done. And one of our kind of key guiding principles through the Net Zero Action Plan was equity. And thinking about, for this project, how equity relates to embodied carbon, there are a couple of different ways. So one, thinking about the data that we'll be collecting through this emissions accounting will provide greater transparency into our actual climate impact. And then, that will provide greater accountability as we continue to address the wider climate crisis in all of its challenges. And second, this kind of emissions counting is still relatively new, and we're trying to figure out, if there could be a substantial time and cost implication on developers, especially those who may not be thinking about how or the best ways to do this kind of emissions accounting. And so this relates to equity, because if that cost turns out to be pretty significant, there runs the potential of those costs being pushed onto tenants. And so part of our current project is to really understand what that time and cost could be, especially as, we see more and more regulations being put onto developers, thinking about the new Stretch Energy Code and others. So it's already a pretty complex regulatory landscape, but all for good reasons. And so that's why we are thinking about how this additional kind of emissions accounting could impact developers' operations. And so kind of thinking more broadly, while it's out of the scope of this project that I'm leading, it is worth noting that there is potential that this could help shift the market and incentivize the development and procurement of low carbon materials, especially once we do start, to set some reduction target goals in the future. But it kind of begs the question as to why we should start to regulate embodied carbon. And it's great to hear that work is being done at the state level. Cities are particularly well positioned to work on this as well. We are still a government and privy to certain challenges, but we do have certain things that we can control. So I know that other cities and towns around the state are working on this. And so regional collaboration is really important for all of this. And so I that's about all I have for tonight. And so, yeah, feel free to reach out with me with any questions or to continue the conversation. As I said, regional collaboration on this effort is really important. And so I'd love to hear from others on this call who are listening about your thoughts and what you might be thinking of doing. So I'll pass it over to MCAN to take it from here.
Fantastic, Thomas. Thank you so much. And what a good piece to end on, that need for regional collaboration. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that just yesterday, Newton passed an ordinance to support and to require LCAs. And so, they're kind of taking the lead, and it is about kind of collaborating and learning what each community is doing and how it can seamlessly work together. So thank you so much for being here and for all of your work on this important issue. It's so critical to understand how you can take action locally, because there's a lot that can be done. I want to turn things over to Miranda. I believe the Wi-Fi issues have been resolved. to talk about the other pieces at the statewide level and what they are and why they're so critical. I will also just say we'll probably go 5 minutes over, but you do not want to miss those 5 minutes because it's going to be all about how you can take action and what you can do to be a part of this work. So hang on just 5 minutes and enjoy. And so with that, I'll take it over. I'll pass it over to you, Miranda.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Logan, and all of you for joining us tonight. And thank you, Thomas, for laying out some of the many solutions that can be taken and implemented to begin to address embodied carbon emissions at the local level. There are also currently 3 bills that are in Massachusetts legislature, which we've kind of discussed at the beginning, at the top of this meeting, and that will begin the path to lay out the statewide infrastructure to address embodied carbon. As our incredible legislative champions and leaders in this space previously laid out, these bills will ensure that the state is beginning to pay attention to this issue, that we are also beginning to catch up to the other states that begun this work, and if passed, potentially make Massachusetts a leader in reducing embodied carbon emissions in our buildings. So from analysis and advisory boards to procurement and identifying best practices, these policies will catapult Massachusetts' ability to reduce embodied carbon emissions. So now I will cover exactly what these 3 bills will establish. The first bill I will touch on is an act relative to the use of low embodied carbon concrete in state projects. The wonderful legislative sponsors are Representative Cahill and Senator Cream, and the bill establishes minimum standards for low embodied carbon concrete used by contractors and subcontractors working on state projects. It requires contractors to issue periodic test reports to evaluate the environmental, public health, and safety impacts of low embodied carbon concrete. This is a buy clean bill or procurement bill, which some of you have probably already heard of nationally. There are many states across the country like California, Colorado, New York, who've already passed this kind of legislation, proving it to be feasible, a low cost premium and effective to reducing embodied carbon emissions. We, Massachusetts, can no longer be lagging behind in this sector. This bill will also establish a stakeholder group with several roles, an example being examining incentives and credits to encourage the usage and innovation of low embodied carbon concrete in state agencies. It's also important to highlight, as this graphic shows, that concrete is the material with the highest embodied carbon content. So it makes sense that this is the clear first step in reducing embodied carbon emissions in our buildings. One more slide. The second bill I will be covering is an act requiring state procurement of low carbon building materials. And our wonderful legislative sponsors are Representative Garbely and Senator Cream. And this bill introduces a public procurement standard or a buy clean policy, just like the last, for relevant state projects. The procurement policy will specify the solicitation for state projects to include project specifications, including a report of environmental impacts of said materials, as Logan referred to as known as EPDs. And again, this is a procurement bill, which are a key piece of the puzzle. Not only will we be reducing our emissions, but we will be creating a whole new market and economy in this space by requiring low embodied carbon materials through EPDs. The bill will also require the state to establish global warming potentials that public projects must consider as they choose materials with lower levels of embodied carbon. The materials that will be considered as part of this legislation includes asphalt, cement and concrete, glass, post-tension steel, wood for structural elements, and insulation. And from this image, you can see there's a dramatic reduction in emissions and little to no cost premium in this transition of building materials. This is an area we can move forward in aggressively, urgently, and effectively. And the last piece of legislation is an act incorporating embodied carbon into state climate policy. Our wonderful legislative sponsors are Representative Sicolo, Representative Owens, and Senator Comerford. And this legislation establishes a broad and expert advisory state board to address embodied carbon and identify the best ways to reduce these emissions. It will require the Department of Energy Resources to put forward recommendations and best practices for measuring and reducing embodied carbon. As outlined in the graphic, there is a process and much needed framework that needs to take place to identify the steps and clear pathway to move us along in the most effective way possible. This bill will also require a report outlining effective regulation strategies for reducing embodied carbon, incorporating insight from affordable housing, frontline communities, and other regulatory agencies. We unfortunately don't have that knowledge yet, and we desperately need it in order to move forward equitably and efficiently. It will also require the measurement and reduction of embodied carbon to be incorporated into the stretch and specialized stretch code in this coming cycle, something we all know very well in this space. And so as you can see from this graphic, procurement, which the last two bills covered, and building code are two key areas to address embodied carbon. This is a piece we are obviously very excited about. Building codes is a huge opportunity to require the measurement and reduction of embodied carbon at scale. This is exactly what we can achieve at the statewide level. But also in the graphic, the other piece of the puzzle from reuse, zoning, climate action plans, which Tom covered, can be done successfully at the local level. But altogether, with local action and statewide action through these three bills, we are able to accomplish a lot in this sector. So these three bills are critical to ensure that the state is beginning to pay attention to these unaddressed emissions in our built environment and to move us towards holistically and equitably decarbonizing our buildings. In order for us to catch up to other states who have begun this work and to make Massachusetts a leader in reducing embodied carbon emissions in our buildings, we must push for the state to begin this much needed work to transform our buildings from climate polluters to climate protectors. Thank you so much. Pass it back to you, Logan.
Fantastic, Miranda. Thank you so much for such a clear overview of legislation. That, you know, at some of the, you know, when you're in the nitty gritty, it's easy to get overwhelmed with new terms, new concepts, and various different components. But at its face, you know, I think the impact and the benefit is really clear. So thank you. I want to conclude this event by talking about what you all can do to be a part of this. You know, we have heard why and how this matters. We've also heard, you know, very clearly that there are reasonable pathways, effective pathways that we can take to move this forward. And we do need everyone to be involved in order to make, you know, this vision a reality. And so I want to talk about what you can do and how you can be a part of this work. And I also want to provide you with the tools and the instruments to be effective. So MCAN has put together what I believe is a wonderful toolkit to call for action on embodied carbon. And it really has everything you could need. It has one-pagers outlining the legislation that we discussed, outlining pathways for advocacy, and various different related topics. It has resources. There is a lot of thinking and a lot of really smart people doing this work. And they've, you know, made some wonderful resources available. You know, I would highlight in particular the Carbon Leadership Forum's 101 on embodied carbon. So helpful to get yourself up to speed and to help your officials get up to speed. So we have those educational tools, but we also have two other things which I believe are critical. The first is we have a clear template to reach out to your municipal officials and your legislators. And it should be both, but, you know, reach out and for municipal officials, ask them, you know, how you can start thinking about this in your community. For your legislators, co-sponsoring the critical bills that we discussed tonight. And finally, I think this area really deserves more attention. We need to be talking about it in our mainstream and climate discourse. And so, we've helped to make that easy for you to talk about this within your network by developing a series of social media tweets, just to talk about embodied carbon, to talk about the legislation that we discussed, and to identify clear avenues to move forward. I really do want to emphasize this, reaching out to your legislators. We know that the best way for folks to take action, the best way and the most likely way that we're going to get progress in the legislature is through highlighting this and showcasing that this matters not only to MCAN, but to folks who are living in the districts of representatives and senators. So to make this easier for you, we have put together an automated action network email template that you can use to reach out to your legislators. And Miranda is putting this in the chat as we speak to make it easy. Spend a few minutes. The template and all the information is there. Write a personalized note talking about why this is important to you specifically and in your community. And help us raise this issue, to where it should be, which is right there, with operational carbon in our built environment. And again, really encourage you to raise this to municipal officials and to your local elected officials. I think, again, we need to start being very clear that we want this. We want to see action in this area, even if it's complex, even if it requires some thought and some intentionality. We want this because we need this in order to have holistic and effective building decarbonization. So as you are leaving tonight, I hope you will copy and paste those action networks, the links. I hope you will look at the bit.ly, which is bit.ly, all caps, embodied carbon. So bit.ly / all caps, embodied carbon. And, find out how you can be a part of taking action. Spend a few minutes today, tomorrow, and just, help to galvanize support and to make this a mainstream issue, which it deserves to be. And with that, I think given time, we will forgo Q&A, but I just want to thank you all so much for being here and for your attention to this issue. We can and we will make Massachusetts a leader in this space, and it is going to be together. So I just want to applaud you all for being here. I want to applaud you all for learning about this critical issue. And I am so excited to continue to collaborate with you to advance this issue at the state, local, and who knows, national level as well. So with that, I hope you all have a fantastic evening. I hope you all continue thinking about embodied carbon and what you can do to be a part of this necessary transformation.